The woman was a famous actress, but she was arrogant and impossible to work with. She didn't even show the director any respect, fed up with her attitude. The director teamed up with several cast members to play a prank on her. They watched through the security monitors, laughing as they waited for her to embarrass herself. But the very next second, they witnessed something horrifying on the screen. A terrifying monster suddenly appeared and hacked the woman to death with an axe. Everyone believed it was some kind of supernatural incident. But once the truth is revealed, the ugliest side of human nature will be exposed in full. One day, the teenage detective Hajime and Miyuki took part-time jobs on a film set. The movie was being shot in a villa high up on a snowy mountain. There, Hajime met a group of actors as well as the famous singer Reika. While Hajime was handing out coffee, the famous actress Kano got into an argument with the photographer Michio. Seeing the tension, Hajime suddenly came up with an idea. He grabbed a cup of coffee and took a huge gulp. The next second, he collapsed to the floor. Everyone present was shocked. Everyone except Kano, who calmly applauded the performance. She claimed that Hajime's acting was far more convincing than the terrible actors standing around him. It turned out she had already noticed that the blood Hajime coughed up was nothing more than ordinary stage blood. She had also noticed that countless hidden cameras and microphones had been installed all over the set. Those strange arrangements only made Kano even angrier. She immediately turned around and walked away. Just as Hajime was complaining that Kano's attitude was unbelievably awful, Director Haruta somehow blamed the entire situation on him. While Hajime was still feeling frustrated, a painting hanging in the hallway caught his attention. Miyuki explained to Hajime that the man in the painting was the owner of the snowy mountain, and also the famous painter Issei. Hajime felt there was something unusual about the portrait, but before he could figure out what it was, a staff member informed him that everyone except Kano had to head to the dormitory. Although Hajime had no idea why, he followed the others and drove to the lodge on the other side of the river. After getting out of the car, Hajime went inside alone to turn on the lights, but the moment the room lit up, a horrifying painting startled him. A man told Hajime that the terrifying artwork depicted the legendary snow yaksha. While the man was speaking, Hajime suddenly heard Inspector Isamu's voice. Even more surprisingly, Officer Kengo was there as well. After chatting for a while, Hajime finally learned that the two officers had actually been on a business trip. Unfortunately, their car had broken down on the way, forcing them to spend the night there. Hajime also discovered that the mysterious man who had just appeared was none other than the famous painter Issei, the very person Miyuki had mentioned. Without hesitation, Hajime eagerly asked Issei for an autograph. Soon afterward, a staff member called everyone into the monitoring room. The surveillance screen showed Kano, still asleep alone in the villa. It turned out that the film crew had prepared a series of elaborate pranks to teach Kano a lesson. However, to make sure nothing actually happened to her, Director Haruta sent Ayatsuji to the villa. The moment Ayatsuji left, actor Daimon wasted no time and pressed the switch. Moments later, the vibration suddenly shook Kano awake. Panicking, she rushed into the hallway and called for help. As Haruta pressed another button, the vase beside Kano instantly exploded. Kano's miserable reaction filled Haruta with satisfaction, but at that very moment, the snow yaksha suddenly appeared on the surveillance screen. Hajime assumed it was simply another actor hired by Haruta, but Haruta looked completely confused. Miyuki guessed that it might be Ayatsuji. However, Kengo pointed out that Ayatsuji had left only 12 minutes earlier. Even at full speed, it would take at least 20 minutes to reach the villa from there. While everyone was still wondering who the snow yaksha really was, the monster suddenly raised its axe and brutally brought it down on Kano. Afterward, the snow yaksha turned around and started to leave, but without warning, it sprinted toward the surveillance camera and ripped it off completely. At the same time, Ayatsuji arrived at the villa. Kengo immediately called her and told her to drive back at once to pick everyone up. Not long afterward, the group arrived at the villa. While Isamu and Kengo examined the crime scene, Hajime quietly looked around on his own. Before long, he noticed that the painting in the hallway was somehow different, but exactly what had changed, he couldn't remember. Meanwhile, Kengo looked at the raging blizzard outside and concluded that the killer was probably still inside the house. After hearing that, actor Ken immediately suspected Michio, because he was the only person who had yet to show up. But Daimon argued that Ken was actually the more suspicious one. As it turned out, Ken and Kano had once been in a relationship. In the end, they broke up over a massive insurance policy. Daimon then added that director Haruta also had a motive. He clearly remembered that one of Kano's unreasonable outbursts had directly caused one of Hiruta's films to be pulled from release. Daimon's accusation immediately infuriated Hiruta. Just as the two were about to start arguing, Kengo quickly interrupted them. He believed that the most important thing now was establishing everyone's alibi. One by one, everyone explained where they had been. The strangest account came from Issei. He claimed that before the prank began, he drank a cup of coffee made by Ayatsuji, and then returned to his room to sleep. Issei's explanation left Reika completely puzzled. Under normal circumstances, drinking coffee should make a person feel more awake, not sleepy. Faced with Reika's question, Issei suddenly fell silent. At that moment, Isamu suddenly walked in with 3 villagers. According to the villagers, when they got up around 2 a.m. and looked out their windows, they saw mysterious ghostly lights floating near the cliffs above the frozen river. One of them even believed that the eerie light was the lantern carried by the snow yaksha. Hajime couldn't help but wonder what the snow yaksha really was. The villagers then began telling the legend of the snow yaksha. Long ago, Sagori village was extremely poor, and human traffickers often wandered through the area. On one snowy night, a woman carrying a baby arrived at the village. Cold, hungry, and desperate, she knocked on every door, begging the villagers for help. But the villagers mistook her for a child trafficker. Not a single person allowed her inside. With nowhere else to go, the woman was forced to leave the village while still holding her child. In the end, both of them froze to death in the middle of the snowstorm. Ever since that night, a terrifying legend has been passed down through the village. Whenever a heavy snowfall begins, the woman's restless spirit returns as the snow yaksha, wandering through the village and slaughtering anyone in her path. Just as the villagers were telling the story, Ayatsuji suddenly crawled into the house. Screaming in terror, everyone immediately rushed outside. Not far away, a body could be seen buried inside a snowman. The victim was none other than the missing cinematographer, Michio. Hajime hurried over to examine the body. He discovered that Michio was still clutching a handful of dried grass. One of the villagers recognized it immediately. It was feed used for horses and cattle. Judging from the degree of rigor mortis, Kengo concluded that Michio had been dead for more than 12 hours. That meant he could not have been Kano's killer. To uncover the truth, Kengo spent the next several hours questioning every member of the film crew. Meanwhile, Hajime returned to the lodge and replayed the surveillance footage. Over and over again, he couldn't understand one thing: the killer had already hidden behind a mask. So why bother destroying the security camera afterward? Just then, Hajime's stomach suddenly started hurting. He rushed toward the restroom, only to bump into Issei. Hajime immediately apologized, but Issei didn't say a single word and simply walked away. That strange reaction left Hajime puzzled. He returned to his room and asked Miyuki why Issei always wore a mask. According to Miyuki, the reason dated back to a plane crash years earlier. Only a handful of people had miraculously survived the accident, and Issei was one of them. Although he survived, his face had suffered severe burns. From that day on, he always wore a mask. As a result, very few people had ever seen his real face. That was also why Miyuki had been so surprised when she first saw Issei's portrait. The moment Hajime heard the words Issei's portrait, something suddenly clicked. He finally realized why the hallway had felt so strange. The painting had been replaced. At that moment, Shiro pulled up an earlier image of the portrait from the surveillance recordings. After taking just one look, Hajime quickly formed a theory. He suspected that the painting itself might contain an important clue that could identify the killer. Shiro immediately searched through the recordings, trying to find more footage of the portrait. But while reviewing the video, a shot of the hallway caught Hajime's attention. He noticed a faint glow of fire outside the window at the end of the corridor. Those mysterious lights might very well be the ghostly flames the villagers had described. Without hesitation, Hajime decided to investigate the source of the light. The group soon drove back to find the 3 villagers once again. Using their descriptions together with a map of the area, Hajime quickly pinpointed the exact location where the lights had appeared. Although the spot wasn't far from the opposite side of the frozen river, there was still a gap of nearly 5 meters. Using ropes, Hajime and Isamu climbed down to the bottom of the cliff. Before long, Hajime spotted a long rope hanging across the rocks in the river. The discovery led Isamu to make a bold deduction. He believed the killer had stretched a rope between the 2 cliffs, allowing them to travel quickly between the villa and the lodge. Just then, Kengo arrived, claiming he had made an important discovery. The group followed him back to the monitoring room. Kengo then pulled up an image of Issei's portrait. He explained to Hajime that the reason the painting looked so strange was because the canvas had actually been painted using a mirror, while Isamu was still confused. Miyuki handed Kengo a fax containing old records. On the document, Hajime clearly saw the names of the reporters who had covered the plane crash years ago. They were Kano, Michio, and director Haruta. A terrible feeling immediately crept over Hajime. Without wasting another second, the three of them rushed off to find Haruta, but when they arrived at his room, he was already dead. Scattered across the floor were huge piles of cash, stained with blood. The moment Kengo saw the scene, he immediately gathered everyone except Issei. Once everyone had assembled, Kengo began laying out his deductions. He believed that the current Issei was most likely an impostor, and the strongest evidence was the portrait itself. Judging from the angle of the collar, it was obvious that the real Issei had been left-handed when he painted it, but when Hajime asked Issei for an autograph, he had signed it with his right hand. On top of that, when Kano was murdered, Issei had no alibi whatsoever. For those reasons, Kengo was convinced that the fake Issei was the real murderer behind the case. Kengo further theorized that the real Issei had actually died in the plane crash years ago. Kano, Michio, and Haruta, who had covered the accident, had unexpectedly discovered Issei. Afterward, they arranged for someone to impersonate him, using Issei's identity to sell his paintings and pocket enormous amounts of money. Having reached that conclusion, Kengo immediately decided to confront Issei face to face, but no matter how hard they knocked, no one answered the door. With no other choice, Isamu and Kengo worked together and forced the door open. Inside, the fake Issei was already dead, based on the medicine scattered across the floor and the suicide note left on the desk. Isamu concluded that the fake Issei had taken his own life out of guilt. From the contents of the letter, everyone soon learned that the dead man, Takao, had been a journalist. As for his motive, it was exactly as Kengo had predicted. While impersonating Issei, he had made a fortune selling the painter's works, but with so many people sharing the profits, he gradually became dissatisfied. To claim all the money for himself, and to keep the secret buried forever, Takao decided to kill the others. Just then, Isamu discovered the snow yakusha costume hidden inside a closet, but the serial murder case was far from over. Instead, Hajime quietly stared at the paintings inside the room, because he knew that although Kengo's deduction made perfect sense, one crucial question still remained unanswered: the mystery of the ghostly flames. Hajime was convinced that the real truth was hidden behind those mysterious lights. While searching another drawer, Hajime accidentally found a pair of scissors. The moment he saw them, something suddenly clicked in his mind. Without hesitation, he called Isamu and headed back to the villa. While driving there, Hajime turned on the windshield washer. The water sprayed onto the glass and instantly froze, causing the car to nearly crash into the cliff. But in that single moment, every piece of the puzzle finally fell into place. Soon afterward, Hajime gathered everyone together and began explaining the case. Takao had not committed suicide, he had been murdered. Hajime then held up the pair of scissors and told everyone that they were designed for left-handed people. Judging from the purchase date printed on the packaging, it was almost certain that Takao himself had bought them. In other words, Takao was also left-handed. Yet when he died, the pen had been placed in his right hand. That was the killer's biggest mistake. Earlier, when Hajime asked Takao for an autograph, Takao had deliberately signed with his right hand, but at the same time, he had unknowingly deceived the real killer as well. The reason the murderer destroyed the surveillance camera was simply to frame Takao, making everyone believe that he was the culprit, and the true murderer was hiding among the survivors of the plane crash years ago. According to the police investigation, a little girl named Q's had survived the crash after losing her mother. In the end, she was adopted by the villagers. That girl, Q's, was none other than Ayatsuji. Faced with the sudden accusation, Ayatsuji didn't argue or deny it. Instead, she calmly admitted that she was indeed one of the crash survivors. But when it came to the murders, she firmly insisted that she was innocent. Hajime then led everyone to the edge of the cliff. Right before their eyes, he slowly walked forward toward the drop. Yet instead of falling, he appeared to float in midair. To everyone's astonishment, a bridge of solid ice connected the two cliffs, which should never have been connected at all. Hajime explained that by using the ice bridge, it only took 5 minutes to travel on foot between the villa and the lodge. Everyone immediately wondered how such a bridge could possibly exist. Hajime revealed that the day before Kano was killed, Ayatsuji had secretly fastened ropes to both sides of the cliffs. She then spread large amounts of livestock feed across the ropes. After that, she covered everything with layers of snow. Once the snow froze into solid ice, Ayatsuji cut the ropes on both ends of the cliffs. That was exactly why Michio's body had been found gripping a handful of animal feed. Next, Hajime asked Isamu to drive a car onto the ice bridge to test just how much weight it could support. After grumbling for a while, Isamu slowly drove forward. To everyone's surprise, the bridge's strength far exceeded their expectations. At that moment, one of the villagers walked over. He recognized it instantly. This ice bridge was actually an old transportation method, once invented by the villagers for hauling cargo across the valley. Hajime then spread more livestock feed over the surface of the bridge. Next, he poured gasoline all over it. After everything was ready, he lit the gasoline-soaked feed on fire. As the flames grew larger, the ice bridge began melting away. Hajime turned to everyone and said, "The burning flames are the ghost lights the villagers saw." After hearing Hajime's complete deduction, Ayatsuji offered no defense. Instead, she quietly picked up snowballs and began tossing them one by one. Then, she finally revealed the truth. Years ago, during the plane crash, her mother had been trapped beneath a massive piece of wreckage. Desperate to save her, Ayatsuji ran everywhere, crying out for help. Before long, she found Haruta and the other three, but at that very moment, they were secretly discussing their plan to impersonate Issei. Ayatsuji rushed toward them, begging them to save her mother, but afraid their scheme would be exposed. They simply turned around and walked away. In that instant, her mother lost her only chance to survive. The young Ayatsuji used her own tiny body to hold back the collapsing wreckage, but in order to protect her daughter, her mother gathered the last of her strength and pushed Ayatsuji away. From that very moment, Ayatsuji silently swore that Haruta and the other three would one day pay for what they had done. Back then, just like she was doing now, she kept throwing snowballs one after another. If they hadn't been so selfish, the ending would have been different. If they hadn't turned away and had saved Ayatsuji's mother, she would have survived. If the woman carrying a baby had not been driven out by the villagers, but instead been taken inside to warm herself, the legend of the snow yaksha would never have come into existence. But life has no what-ifs. Ayatsuji didn't just kill those 4 people, she also killed the cold indifference of everyone who had stood by and done nothing on that snowy night so many years ago. And in the end, she herself became a victim of that very same indifference. She just wanted her mother to live. Behind that sentence was not hatred but a child's final desperate cry to this world.